every house settles. It's the first thing people tell you when you buy an old home. Floors creak, pipes groan, the whole frame seems to sigh at night. You're told to get used to it. But what do you do when the settling doesn't stop? When you get the distinct, creeping feeling that your new home isn't done settling, but is still being built. Not repaired, not renovated, built, and you are living inside the construction site. That's a feeling no one prepares you for. My partner, Chloe, and I bought the house on Ash Street in the fall. It was our dream, home, a century-old craftsman that had been recently flipped. The renovator had done a masterful job, preserving the old-world charm while installing a modern kitchen and sleek, new bathrooms. It felt solid, pristine, and most importantly, it felt finished. We spent the first 2 weeks in a state of bliss, arranging furniture, planning our garden, and marveling at our good fortune. I worked from home as a graphic designer, so while Chloe was at her office, I spent long, quiet hours alone in our new space. It was during those hours that I first began to notice the house's eccentricities. A floorboard that would creak one day, but not the next. A door that would stick in its frame for a week, and then swing freely, as if it had never been a problem. I chalked it all up to the house breathing, expanding and contracting with the autumn humidity. It was charming, at first, that the charm began to fade about a month in. I was in my office, a small spare bedroom upstairs, when I got up to stretch my legs. I walked down the hall toward the bathroom, and my shoulder brushed against the door frame. It struck me as odd. I'd walked that path 100 times and never touched the frame. I paused, looking back. The hallway seemed narrower. I shook my head, blaming eye strain from staring at a screen all day. But the feeling lingered. The next day, I went to turn on the living room light, and my hand went to the empty wall beside the doorway. I stood there for a moment, confused, before finding the switch on the other side of the frame. I could have sworn it had been on the left. Chloe just laughed when I mentioned it. "You're just tired, love," she'd said. "You've got new house brain." But I knew where that light switch had been. My paranoia began to take on a quiet, methodical shape. I started taking pictures with my phone, documenting the angles of rooms, the placement of outlets, the widths of hallways. I bought a laser tape measure. On a Tuesday, I measured the main hallway, 4 feet, 2 inches wide. On Thursday, I measured it again, 3 feet, 11 inches. My blood ran cold. I showed Chloe the conflicting photos, the measurements in my notebook. She looked at me with deep concern. "Babe," she said softly, "maybe you need to take a break. Get out of the house for a bit." She thought I was losing my mind, and her doubt was more terrifying than any shrinking wall. I felt utterly alone, a prisoner in my own home which seemed to be closing in on me. I started hearing sounds inside the walls. Not the scratching of mice, but a faint, rhythmic tapping. Sometimes, a soft scraping sound, like wood being planed. And once, clear as day, I heard the sharp thwip of a tape measure snapping shut. It was in that moment I realized this wasn't a haunting. The house wasn't occupied by something dead. It was occupied by a worker. The breaking point came on a Wednesday night. I had been documenting a small hairline crack that had appeared in the plaster of my office wall. Over 3 days, it had widened, splintered, and traveled from the ceiling to the floor. I was becoming convinced the wall was slowly bulging inward. That night, I was jolted awake by a tremendous crash from downstairs. Chloe and I both rushed out of bed and down the stairs. In the living room, a large, heavy bookcase had toppled over, scattering books across the floor, but it hadn't just fallen. The wall behind it was warped, buckled into a sickening curve. It looked like it had been pushed out from the inside with incredible, silent force. As we stared at it, a fine, pale dust began to trickle from a fresh crack near the baseboard. Chloe thought a pipe had burst, but I knew better. The sounds, the measurements, the shifting architecture, it all culminated in this moment. An unhinged obsession took hold of me. I grabbed a hammer from the toolbox. Chloe yelled at me to stop, but I didn't listen. I swung the hammer into the buckled drywall. It shattered icily, but behind it, there was no insulation, no wiring, no wooden studs. There was only a dark, hollow space that seemed to absorb the light from the room. It was an impossible void, a cavity that shouldn't exist within the frame of our home. And from the depths of that darkness, I heard it again. The sharp, distinct sound of a tape measure snapping shut, as if a final measurement had just been taken. Then a voice, a dry whisper that sounded like dust and old paper, spoke a single, horrifying word. Done. We were out of the house in 5 minutes. We stayed in a hotel and never went back. Our beautiful, perfect home was repossessed by the bank. Chloe eventually came to believe me, or at least, she chose to believe me over the alternative that I had gone completely insane. My family thinks I had a breakdown, but I know what happened. I checked the real estate listings for it sometimes. It was sold again a year later. The new photos are bright and cheerful, but I can see it. The living room is definitely smaller now. The window above the kitchen sink is gone, and the front door is in a completely different place. Someone, or something, is still working on the house on Ash Street, and I think, sooner or later, they'll finish it for good. When you buy a house, you're told you're buying the property, the land, the structure, the fixtures. What they don't tell you is that you're also inheriting the echoes. Most are faint as scuff on the floor where a chair used to be, a faded rectangle on the wall where a picture hung for 50 years. They're harmless. But the old man who owned our house before us, he didn't just leave an echo. He left behind a piece of his weekly routine. And that routine had no intention of stopping just because his heart had taught my wife, Sarah, and I bought our first home on a quiet, tree-lined street. It was a modest bungalow, a little dated, but solid and well cared for. The realtor told us the previous owner, a Mr. Abernathy, had lived there for over 60 years before passing away peacefully in a nursing home. The whole house had a distinct scent when we first viewed it, a gentle, not unpleasant mix of old books, pipe tobacco, and a faint powdery floral smell. We spent the first month scrubbing, painting, and airing the place out, eager to replace his story with our own. But one scent stubbornly refused to leave. In the small spare bedroom upstairs, a faint but persistent aroma of lavender lingered in the air. While cleaning out the attic, we found a dusty cardboard box filled with carousels of old 35mm slides. The box was simply labeled, "Our Memories." We set it aside, intending to throw it out, and thought nothing more of it. We were young, and the past felt like a foreign country. Our new life was peaceful, predictable, until the first Tuesday. I was working late in my study downstairs when I heard it. A faint, mechanical sound from the spare bedroom directly above me. It was a rhythmic, unmistakable sound from my own childhood, the soft whir of a fan, followed by the gentle click-clack of a slide projector advancing to the next image. I froze, listening. Whir, click-clack, whir, click-clack. I crept up the stairs, my heart beginning to thump. The door to the spare room was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was dark, empty, and silent. The sound was gone. And yet, the smell of lavender was stronger than I had ever known it to be. Sarah was out with friends, and when I told her later, she brushed it off. It was probably the neighbor's TV. Honey, this old house has thin walls. I tried to believe her, but the next Tuesday, it happened again. The same time, the same room, the same sound. This time, Sarah was home. She heard it too. A quiet, ghostly rhythm from the empty room upstairs. We searched the entire house, the attic, the basement. There was no slide projector. The following weekend, an older neighbor from across the street came over to introduce herself. She'd known Mr. Abernathy for years. "Such a sweet man," she said. "He missed his Eleanor terribly." She told us his wife Eleanor had died in that house, in that spare bedroom, many years ago. She had loved lavender, and every Tuesday night, right up until the day they moved him to the home, Mr. Abernathy would go into her old room, open a bottle of her perfume to let the scent fill the air, and spend the evening looking through old slides of their life together. It was his ritual, his way of spending one more evening with her. The news hit me like a physical blow. We weren't hearing a ghost. We were hearing the echo of a profound love, a habit etched so deeply into the fabric of the house that it couldn't be erased. A creeping sense of being an intruder began to settle over me. This wasn't our house. It was their sanctuary. We were just squatting in it. The sound became a source of dread. Every Tuesday, as evening approached, a quiet tension would fill the house. We'd try to ignore it, turn up the TV, but it was always there, at the edge of hearing whir, click-clack, a sad, spectral punctuation mark to our week. One rainy Tuesday, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to a pawn shop and bought a clunky, old, slide projector. That evening, I retrieved the dusty box labeled Our Memories from the attic. Sarah thought I was crazy, but she didn't try to stop me. I set the projector up on a small table in the spare bedroom, aimed it at the blank wall, and loaded the first carousel. As the sun went down, the air in the room grew cold. The scent of lavender, once faint, became thick and almost overwhelming, as if a bottle had just been opened. With a trembling hand, I turned on the projector. The fan whirred to life, and the first image clicked into place. It was a faded photo of a smiling young woman with kind eyes, holding a bouquet of lavender. Eleanor. I clicked through the slides, one by one. Their wedding. A vacation to the Grand Canyon. A child's birthday party. A life lived fully, now reduced to silent squares of light on a wall. As I watched their memories play out, the feeling of being watched myself grew stronger with each click. I reached the end of the carousel. I pressed the button one last time. The machine clicked, but the slot was empty. The projector shone a perfect, bright white rectangle on the wall. The room was silent, except for the whirring of the fan, and then I heard it. A soft, contented sigh, right beside me. My eyes were locked on that empty square of light, and in it, two new shadows appeared. They were cast from the projector's beam, but their source wasn't in the room. They were perfect, crisp silhouettes, one of a tall, stooped man, the other of a woman resting, her head on his shoulder. They stood together, looking at the white screen, as if they were finally watching the one memory that was missing. We left the projector running when we fled the room. We sold the house a few weeks later, taking a loss just to be free of it. We never told the new owners why we were leaving. What could we say? That the house was already occupied, not by ghosts, but by a love story that refused to end. I hope the new family learns to live with it. I hope they learn to respect the quiet sanctity of a Tuesday night, and I hope, for their own sake, they don't throw away that old box of slides. Some things don't belong to the living. Every kid digs for treasure in a new backyard. It's a rite of passage, a search for pirate gold or old glass bottles. My son, Leo, was no different. When we moved into our new house, the first thing he did was grab a trowel and start exploring. The problem is, he didn't find a pirate's chest. He found something else, something that had been buried, but not nearly deep enough. And he made the simple, childish mistake of bringing it inside. It was supposed to be a fresh start for us. After a rough couple of years, I'd saved up enough to buy a small house on the edge of town. It was older, and the backyard was a wild overgrown space that blended into a thick patch of woods. For my 8-year-old son Leo, it was paradise. He spent hours out there, mapping his new kingdom, and I was just happy to see him smile. The house itself needed work, but it was ours. It felt safe. It felt like a fortress. How wrong I was. One afternoon, Leo ran inside, his face flushed with excitement, clutching a small, dirt-caked wooden box. It was old, bound with brittle leather. Straps. Treasure. Mom, he yelled. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried moss, was a strange figurine. It was carved from a single piece of dark, gnarled root. Vaguely humanoid, but with limbs that were too long and a body that was twisted and thin. It had no face, just a smooth, blank surface where the eyes and mouth should have been. It gave me a shiver, but Leo was enchanted. He called it the Root Man and insisted on keeping it on his bedside table. The first week was fine, then the strange things started. I'd hear faint scratching sounds from Leo's room late at night. When I'd check on him, he'd be fast asleep, the Root Man sitting silently on his nightstand. Then Leo began talking about it. The Root Man tells me secrets, he'd say at breakfast, his eyes wide. He knows everything about the woods. I chalked it up to an imaginary friend, a way to cope with the move, but his secrets were unsettlingly specific. He told me which tree in the yard was sick on the inside, which patch of soil was too sour to grow anything. He was always right. Then I started finding things. Little piles of rich, black soil in the middle of the hallway. A single, desiccated beetle on my pillow. A damp, curled leaf on the pristine kitchen counter. Leo would swear he didn't do it, and I believed him. Around the same time, my houseplants began to die. One by one, they withered, their leaves turning black no matter how much I watered them. All except for one. A single, stubborn weed had sprouted from a crack in the floorboards inside Leo's closet, and it was growing with an unnatural vigor. The house no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like it had been breached. The end came on a moonless night. I was woken from a deep sleep by a strange noise. It was a low, rhythmic thumping sound, steady and deep. It was coming from Leo's room. It sounded, impossibly, like a heartbeat. My own heart hammering in my chest, I crept out of bed and pushed his door open a crack. The room was cold. The window was wide open, a silent invitation to the dark woods outside. Leo was standing beside it, his back to me, perfectly still. I looked at his nightstand. The Root Man was there, but it looked wrong. It seemed larger, its twisted limbs unfurled as if stretching after a long sleep. The deep thumping was coming from it. As I watched in horror, a pale, thread-like tendril snaked out from the base of the figurine. It crawled across the wooden table, dropped to the floor, and slithered across the room until it disappeared into the crack in the closet where the weed was growing. Leo turned his head slowly. His eyes were glassy and unfocused in the dim light. "He's hungry," he whispered, his voice flat and empty. "He wants to come all the way inside now." Just then, a loud, scraping sound echoed from right outside the window. A long, dark shape, like a gnarled branch, tapped sharply against the glass, demanding entry. I don't remember screaming. I just remember the feeling of cold, absolute terror. I lunged into the room, grabbed Leo with one arm and the thrumming, vibrating figurine with the other. I ran. We clattered down the stairs, and I didn't stop until I was in front of the fireplace. With a strangled sob, I threw the Root Man into the empty hearth. I fumbled with a lighter and set a piece of newspaper ablaze, tossing it in after it. The root wood didn't catch fire at first. It just smoked, and a high-pitched, wailing sound, like air being forced through shrieking lungs, filled the house. Then it finally caught, burning with a sick, green light. The thumping stopped. We left the next day. I abandoned the house, the mortgage, everything. We live in a concrete high-rise in the city now, 20 floors up. There are no yards, no woods, no soil. It's the only way I feel safe. But sometimes, when I'm walking down the street, I'll see a stubborn little weed forcing its way through a crack in the pavement, and I'll feel a cold dread wash over me. And if I stand there too long, I swear I can feel a faint, rhythmic vibration coming from deep beneath my feet. A slow, patient, and familiar heartbeat.